Hi, welcome to Storytime with Gigi. Today we're going to be reading a story from Peanuts, 5-Minute Stories by Charles M. Schulz. I love the Peanuts gang. Make sure you like and subscribe. Our story today is called Lose the Blanket, Linus. This is Linus. Linus loves his blanket more than anything in the world. When Linus holds his blanket, he feels like everything will be all right, no matter what happens. His sister Lucy, however, thinks differently. His blanket annoys her. "When are you going to get rid of that silly blanket?" she asks. "It's not silly," Linus replies. "It makes me feel happy." "Maybe if you had a blanket, you wouldn't be so crabby." "Crabby? Who's crabby?" Lucy shouts. "I guess from now on I'll keep my suggestions to myself," Linus thinks. "This is it," Lucy shouts. Her voice startles Linus and he jumps. Lucy grabs his blanket and runs off. "I wonder what that was all about," Linus thinks. He shrugs and turns to pick up his blanket, but his blanket is nowhere to be found. Linus is still frantically searching for his blanket when Lucy returns. She has a huge grin on her face. "I buried your blanket," she tells him. Linus can't believe his ears. "You buried my blanket?" he yells. "You can't do that. I'll die without that blanket. I'll be like a fish out of water. Tell me where you buried it." That was kind of mean. She shouldn't have done that. Although he won't die without the blanket. Linus tells his friend Charlie Brown what happened. "She said she was going to cure me of the habit once and for all, so she buried my blanket," Linus cries. Linus looks around at his huge backyard. "How am I ever going to find it?" he says. Charlie Brown decides to sleep over at Linus's house to help him get through the first night without his blanket. He pulls up a chair and watches Linus as he sleeps. "Oh," Linus moans. He tosses and turns in his sleep. This is going to be a long night, Charlie Brown thinks. What a good friend Charlie Brown is. Suddenly, Linus opens his eyes. "Is it morning yet?" he asks. "No, it's only 10 o'clock, Charlie Brown replies. 10 o'clock? Linus exclaims. "This night is going to last forever." "Anyway, Charlie Brown, it's nice of you to sit up with me." Charlie Brown smiles at Linus. "This is what friends are for," he says. "Good old Charlie Brown," Linus says. A little while later, Linus closes his eyes again. Ah, that good Charlie Brown thinks he has finally gone to sleep. Maybe if he makes it through the night without his blanket, he'll be all right. "Well, how's he doing?" Lucy's voice booms through the bedroom as she stomps in to check on Linus. "So much for a good night's rest," Charlie Brown says. Kind of messed up that sentence a little bit, but... The next day, Lucy comes over to chat with Charlie Brown. "You think I'm being mean because I buried Linus's blanket, don't you?" she asked. Charlie Brown doesn't say anything. "Well, I'm not," Lucy continues. "I'm really doing him a favor. He's too weak to ever break the habit by himself. He's as weak as... Why, he's as weak as you are, Charlie Brown." I don't think I like that comparison, Charlie Brown thinks. Charlie Brown tries everything he can think of to help his friend. "I have a suggestion, Linus," he says. "Why don't you try a substitute? Would you like this dish towel?" Linus does not like that idea at all. "Would you give a starving dog a rubber bone?" he asks. "No, thank you." Charlie Brown shrugs. "I'm out of ideas," he says. From the moment Linus wakes up the next day, he feels terrible. He goes into the kitchen and takes out a box of cereal for breakfast. He pours some milk on the flakes and takes a bite. He pushes the bowl away. "I can't even eat. Everything tastes sour," he thinks. Lucy, feels just fine. She is relaxing, reading a book. "Please tell me where you buried it," Linus begs. Lucy doesn't answer. "I've just got to find that blanket, Charlie Brown," Linus says. "Lucy won't tell me where she buried it, so I've got to dig until I find it." Linus shovels as he speaks. Charlie Brown admires Linus's determination. "Good luck," he calls after him. Snoopy can't understand why Linus is so upset. Finding things that are buried is easy for Snoopy. He sniffs around a little bit, and there it is. "My blanket!" Linus yells. "Oh, Snoopy, you found it!" When Linus finally lets him go, Snoopy promptly goes back to his doghouse. I've done my good deed for the day, he thinks. Time for a nap. Aw. I hear Linus got his blanket back, Charlie Brown says to Lucy later. Lucy frowns. Yeah, your nosy dog found it. Oh well, I don't care anymore. I'm through trying to help people. They never appreciate it anyway. Linus can't stop hugging his blanket. I got it back. I can't believe it, Linus says. He holds it out in front of him and studies it. It's been buried beneath the ground for days and days, he says. It's dirty, it's ragged, it's torn, and it's even a little moldy. Then he hugs it again. But it's my blanket, he says with a happy sigh. You do realize you can't hold on to your blanket forever, says Lucy. Someday you're going to have to lose the blanket, Linus, whether you like it or not. Linus tries to imagine being a grown-up. He pictures going to work in a suit and tie. He knows he probably can't bring his blanket to work with him. Linus nods. That's very true, Lucy, he says. I realize someday I'll have to give up my blanket. He grins at Lucy, but not today. Lucy rolls her eyes. I give up, she says. And that's our story. I hope you liked it. Poor Linus and his blanket. Make sure that you like and subscribe and share with your friends. Thanks for spending some time with me today. Bye until next time.